Well, hey there, Steve from Backcountry Gallery here. Thanks for stopping by and watching my video today. This time around, I'm going to show you a new way to autofocus that maybe you haven't thought of before. Most people focus their DSLR camera by pressing the shutter release partway down, holding, recomposing, and pressing down the rest of the way to release the shutter. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, it turns out there's another way to autofocus, and you might just like it a little bit better. We're going to disable the autofocus function for your shutter release and switch it exclusively to a button on the back of the camera. This completely separates your autofocus function from your shutter release, and it's called back button autofocus. In my opinion, this gives you much more immediate control over autofocus and makes autofocus much easier to manage from shot to shot without having to change everything every time. In fact, I actually can't imagine going back to shutter release autofocus. This is just so much better. Now, in order to see why it's such a benefit, you need to understand the various AF modes and their limitations. With DSLRs, there are usually 3 autofocus modes. You have single shot, continuous, and some DSLRs have an automatic mode. Now, sometimes when people hear single or continuous, they actually confuse autofocus with frame advance. Please don't do that. We're referring to the way your autofocus works, okay? Let's look briefly at how these different AF modes work with the normal technique of focusing with the shutter release. Now, with single shot AF, you focus on a spot in the photo, and as long as you keep your finger pressed halfway down on the shutter release, the focus remains locked at that distance, regardless of whether the subject moves in or out of focus or not. Most of the time, this is recommended for stationary subjects, since, if your subject actually moves towards you away from you, it will actually step out of focus. So how do you solve that? With continuous focus. With continuous AF, as long as you're pressing halfway down on the shutter release, the autofocus will continuously adjust the focus. This is great for moving subjects, like a bird in flight or maybe a coyote walking towards you. Just keep your finger on the shutter release, you keep that pressed halfway down, and as the subject moves towards you, the camera will maintain accurate autofocus, or try to at least. The big downside of this mode, of course, is if your subject isn't on the active AF point, then it's not going to be in focus anymore. So it's kind of hard for stationary stuff sometimes. The third option is a mode on some cameras called AFA or AF automatic. This works like single shot AF most of the time, unless the camera thinks that the subject is starting to move, then it's supposed to switch to continuous focus automatically. Personally, I wouldn't want to lose a shot because the system made an error in judgment, and honestly, I've had that happen before. Now that you have the basics, let's get back to why you might like back button AF better. Decoupling the autofocus and shutter release and moving focus exclusively to the back button on the camera allows you to have the best of both single shot and continuous autofocus, and it allows you to have it instantly. When you want continuous autofocus, you just keep pressing the button. When you want single shot AF, you just focus where you want and then release the button to lock in the focus. Let's look at the advantages here. Number 1, you have more control. With a standard AF setup of on the shutter release, every time you take your finger off that button and then put it back on, it has to refocus. If you do a lot of focus, recompose, and shoot, then every time your finger comes off that release, you have to go through that process again, since the camera's gonna wanna focus again. With back button autofocus, you focus once, and when you take your finger off that AF on button or the back button or whatever you're using back there, the focus is locked in. Now you can take a series of shots without worrying that the camera is constantly refocusing in the wrong place because you took your finger off the release between shots on accident, okay? Number 2, it's great for action. Back button autofocus gives you a lot of flexibility in an action situation. With back button AF, as long as you're pressing that button on the back of your camera, the camera is attempting to focus. If the subject stops and you want to take a second to maybe get a critical focus on, say, the eye, just lock the focus into place and then release that autofocus button. The focus is set until you press the AF on button again. If the action starts again, just press the AF on button and it'll start tracking instantly, just like a combo of single and continuous AF all rolled into one. Number 3, It's even great for landscapes. In fact, I use it for landscapes all the time. With standard autofocus, it was really frustrating. Each time I pressed the shutter release, the autofocus would activate, and very seldom was the AF sensor on the exact spot I wanted to focus on. So I'd have to recompose, refocus, and do the whole thing over again, and keep my finger pressed halfway down until I was ready to shoot. With this system, I focus once, compose and shoot all I like, and I don't worry about the camera refocusing whenever I touch the shutter release. Let's do a quick real-life example. Let's say you're photographing a stationary buck in a field. In this case, single shot AF probably be a good choice since he's not moving. With our back button AF system, just use your AF button to focus on his eye, take your finger off that button, and then don't touch it again. Now compose and shoot, just like single shot AF, except if you take your finger off the shutter release, the camera isn't trying to focus again. Your focus is basically set until you press the AF on button again. Oh, wait a second, what if all of a sudden he decides to run? Normally you'd want to switch to continuous autofocus, or at least hope AF auto kicked in, right? But with this method, just press the AF on button. As long as you keep your AF sensor on him, the camera will try to keep him in focus. Again, continuous AF, but the difference is you had it available instantly instead of messing around with buttons to switch over and trying to get all the modes right. You see what I mean? This really is the best of both worlds. Want to try it? Well, I have some great news. Most modern DSLRs are capable of this, and many already have a dedicated AF on button on the back of the camera. Or if you don't see one, you can usually assign or reassign a button to do it from your custom functions menu. Let's look at setup right now. Okay, let's look at how we go ahead and set up our custom functions menu so that we're using back button autofocus. Now I have two different cameras I'm going to show you how to do this on. One is a D800 and it has an AF on button on the back. The other is an older D5000 and it does not have an AF on button. Now unfortunately I'm not going to be able to cover every camera, but hopefully by showing you these two I can kind of point you in the right direction. So let's take a look. Okay, let's take a look at how we go ahead and set this up. Right now we're looking at the info screen on the back of my D800 and you can see it's in AFS mode. I'm going to go ahead and press a button so that's the only thing on the screen. And what I want to do is simply rotate my dial and switch that to AFC mode, putting it in autofocus continuous. Regardless of which camera you have to have this in autofocus continuous in order for it to work. So let's go ahead and set up the D800. Again, keep in mind the D800 does have a dedicated AF on button, so this is actually very simple to set up. I simply go to my custom settings menu and I go under autofocus. I'm looking for an item called AF activation and here it is right here. In this case it's A4. On your camera it could definitely be something different, but look for AF activation and go ahead and select that. And right now it's set to shutter/AF-on. That means when I press my shutter release halfway down it's going to activate autofocus. What I want is I want AF on only to be my option, so I'm going to go ahead and go down there, hit OK, and that's it. My camera is now 100% ready to go ahead and do back button autofocus. Okay, let's look at setting up the D5000. This is a little bit different because this camera does not have a dedicated AF on button on the back. So how do we go ahead and do this? Well, in this particular case, and again your mileage may vary, we need to do the same type of thing. First we need to go to our info screen here and I need to reassign the autofocus. Right now it's on AFA. Don't want it to be there. I want it to be in AFC mode. Again, that's very, very important. If you're not in AFC, this little trick doesn't work at all. So we're going to go ahead and select AFC, and that's a done deal. Now let's go to our menu, and we're going to go to our custom settings again. This time we're going to go down to controls, and we're going to go ahead and select that. And what we're looking for in controls is to assign our AE AF lock button, which it happens to be on right now. I'm going to go ahead and click that. In this case, it's F2. Again, your mileage may vary depending on your camera. What I'm going to do here is go down to AF on, and what I want to do is just go ahead and select that. When I do that, the camera is going to go ahead and automatically assign that little AE lock, AF lock button just behind the dial on my camera here. It's going to reassign that so that it is now an AF on button. And that's really all there is to it. It's automatically decoupled the autofocus and the shutter release, and all my focus is now exclusively on my AE AF lock button. Now a word of warning. When you first try this, you're not going to like it very much. It's going to feel awkward and you're going to be tempted to switch back. But just do this for me. Stick with it for a couple of weeks, preferably trying it out on things that aren't so important to you. Once you get the hang of it, I think you're going to come back and thank me. In fact, sometimes I wonder how I ever functioned without it. So give it a shot and enjoy. Okay, that's about it for today. If you've enjoyed this tip, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button below on YouTube and make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, make sure you stop over at my website, backcountrygallery.com. There's an email newsletter there. If you sign up for it, I'll make sure you get all these tips in your email every time they come out. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.